Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. While of course I enjoy pointing out the threat that people like Nigel Farage pose to all of us and why they are not the answer to the mess that we're in, it's also fun to watch the people who got us into this mess fall apart on national TV. Because last night on BBC Newsnight, Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor who helped Liz Truss crash the economy and then basically just said, oops.
I know the plan put forward only 10 days ago has caused a little turbulence. I get it.
He was with Labour's Margaret Hodge and BBC's Faisal Islam, and they were discussing how do you solve a problem like Brexit.
In principle, Kwasi, are you or your party in favour of bringing down some of the trade barriers which inevitably resulted from leaving the single market and the customs union?
I've always been a fan of free trade, but the idea that, and I know Margaret hasn't peddled this, but there is an idea out there that somehow our economic fortunes, everything would be so much better if we were in the EU. Yeah. I mean, that's for the birds, because if you look at the EU, if you look at the two biggest countries in the EU, both France and Germany, they've all been in the EU for 60 years, and their economies are struggling.
So his logic is, leaving the EU can't have been bad for the UK because there are countries that are in the EU that are financially struggling, even though his wording technically suggested that they're doing better than us, just not that much better than us.
They're not doing much better than ours.
But we can park that for a second.
They're flatlining. Okay. And the challenges that they face are the same as ours.
Congratulations, Kwasi. You've been speaking for 30 seconds and you've already managed to lie to the entire UK. Because did those other countries also leave the EU? Did they choose to put expensive checks and paperwork on all the stuff that they import from the countries they get a third of their food from? No? Then they're not facing the same challenges that we are, because that's kind of the whole reason you're having this discussion.
Some in your party don't acknowledge that the Brexit deal you did inevitably created goods trade barriers.
There were frictions in that.
You caught what he said there? There are frictions, which means it's harder for stuff to pass between the UK and the EU. So because of Brexit, he is admitting that buying and selling stuff with our 30 closest neighbours has become more expensive during a cost of living crisis. But he still goes back to the same argument.
France and Germany have not grown faster than we have over the last 8 years. That's simply not the case. Yeah. And these are the two biggest economies.
Sure. Spain's doing pretty well though, and you know,
and that's the point. There are some EU countries that are doing better than us, some are doing worse than us. But people in a cost of living crisis aren't focused on competing with Germany, they're trying to feed their kids. So all they care about is how is Brexit affecting the UK, which is why Faisal Islam brings him back to task.
The specific issue here is that specific trade barriers have been created for some small businesses in particular, in food exports, in fish exports.
I agree.
There are people, you know, oyster trading, for example. I mean, it's pretty niche, but there are important traders that were given promises during the Brexit campaign who found it very difficult to export into Europe.
And that's a very fair point, because in 2018, Kwasi Kwarteng told people to back the Brexit deal, i.e. go ahead with Brexit, because leaving the EU would make us an independent coastal state and we'd be able to catch more fish. So he explicitly sold Brexit on the basis that it would be good for the UK fishing industry. And then in 2021, when the UK fishing industry was looking at the damage that leaving the EU single market had made to their ability to sell fish to the EU, which by the way, half of all the fish we catch in the UK goes to the EU, the National Federation of Fishermen's Associations said that by 2026, Brexit will have cost them £300 million. And what is Kwasi Kwarteng's response to being called out for the fact that his dishonest promises crippled the fishing industry?
What's happened in the last 20 years is that the US has far outstripped growth in the EU, and that's the big problem. That's what we should be focused on, not on all these sort of side debates about, you know, fisheries and...
So when called out for the fact that his Brexit pushed the UK fishing workers that he promised to save to the point of fearing losing their own homes, he calls it a side issue that we shouldn't really be focusing on. I cannot stress enough, there is nothing inside these people. What you and I would call a soul or a conscience, they are completely devoid of it. But at least Faisal Islam and Margaret Hodge immediately reacted to the ridiculousness of him trying to downplay fishing after they sold Brexit on fishing.
And important though they are.
To be fair, your party put us through that debate for about 7 years.
And it's ironic because in 2016 it was the Remain campaign pointing to big GDP figures about the damage Brexit would do to the whole economy. Meanwhile, the Leave campaign was saying, no, Brexit will be great for your specific industry. And now it's the Brexiteers saying, nah, screw your industry, it's all about GDP growth.
The big picture is why aren't we growing as fast as the United States?
Even though he was the economic chancellor of a government whose economic experts were saying Brexit was costing 4% of the economy. And to come out with phrases like this?
The navel-gazing debate that we've had over the last 8 years about whether Brexit was a good thing or
Nobody's suggesting that. Nobody's suggesting
is a
that.
total sideshow.
Implying that spending the last 10 years focusing on sorting out the mess of Brexit has been a sideshow, a distraction from the real economic concerns of the country when you were the one that brought about Brexit? Like, I know he's deleted his Twitter account so that nobody can hold him to account for all the lies that he told, but he knows that we know he was there, right? I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.